They underestimated her resume. The interview exposed their mistake. Amina's hand trembled as she held the single sheet of paper across the glass table. "This is your most recent professional reference?" Jennifer asked, not looking up from her tablet. Her tone carried the kind of politeness that feels worse than honesty. "Yes," Amina said. Jennifer glanced at the paper, a handwritten letter on floral stationery from a woman named Dorothy Brennan, describing Amina as reliable, punctual, and wonderful with the children. The letter smelled faintly of lavender. Marcus, the senior interviewer, leaned back in his chair with his arms crossed. Ryan had stopped taking notes entirely. Amina could feel the air leaving the room. And before that, Marcus asked, his pen tapping against the resume, "You have a 5-year gap here. Then another 12-year gap before that." "I was raising my children," Amina said quietly, "and helping other families do the same." The words landed like an apology. Jennifer set down her tablet. "Ms. Okoye, I want to be transparent with you. This role requires someone who can hit the ground running with current project management frameworks, Agile, Scrum, stakeholder coordination across multiple time zones. Your background is—" She paused, searching for the kind word. "Non-traditional." Amina nodded. She had heard versions of this before, but Marcus was staring at something on her resume. His pen had stopped tapping. "Lagos," he said slowly. 2002. What exactly did you do there? Before we dive deep into this jaw-dropping story, quick pause. Drop a comment below and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. I love seeing our global Curious Chronicles family light up the map. If you're already hooked and craving more inspiring and captivating stories that poke curiosity like this one, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. We drop beautiful and heart-pounding stories every week that you seriously don't want to miss, so let's dive right into it. 6 weeks earlier, Amina had been standing in her daughter Zara's old bedroom, surrounded by boxes. Zara was gone now, full scholarship to UC Berkeley, a dorm room 3,000 miles away. A future Amina had sacrificed everything to build. The house felt enormous without her. Too quiet. Too expensive. Amina's husband, Chaik, worked 60-hour weeks managing a warehouse in Newark. They were fine. Not comfortable, but fine. Until the medical bills started coming. Until the car needed replacing. Until fine became one emergency away from not fine. She'd started looking at job postings the week after Zara left. At first, she told herself she was just browsing, keeping options open. But every listing felt like a language she used to speak and had somehow forgotten. Proficiency in MS Project required. Experience with Jira preferred. Must have demonstrable track record in fast-paced environments. Amina had coordinated infrastructure projects across 3 Nigerian states. She had managed budgets, timelines, stakeholder expectations, government bureaucracy, and supply chains that collapsed every rainy season. She had done it in her 20s, before she became a mother, before she became invisible. But none of that fit into a resume template. Her last professional job had been 21 years ago. Everything since had been survival. Childcare. Housekeeping. A brief stint as a home health aide. Jobs that paid cash and didn't ask questions. Jobs that kept her family afloat while Chaik built his career and Zara built hers. She rewrote her resume 11 times. Each version felt like she was erasing herself a little more, removing the Lagos years because they seemed too distant, too foreign, too irrelevant. Removing the certifications she'd earned in a country most Americans couldn't find on a map. Removing the projects that had once defined her because there was no way to make them sound legitimate. What remained was a single page with gaps wide enough to disappear into. Zara called her on a Tuesday night, breathless from walking across campus. "Mom, you have to stop doubting yourself. You're literally the smartest person I know. I haven't worked in an office in 2 decades. You raised me while working 3 jobs. You kept our family together. That's harder than any office job." Amina smiled, But she didn't argue. Zara was young. She still believed effort mattered more than optics. Just apply, Zara said. What's the worst that happens? Amina applied to 43 positions. She received 2 automated rejections and 41 silences. Then, on a Thursday morning, her phone buzzed. Subject: interview request, project manager position. Her heart did something complicated. Hope and dread in equal measure. The company was called VisaLink Solutions, a mid-sized tech firm specializing in telecommunications infrastructure in developing markets. They had contracts in Ghana, Kenya, the Philippines. The job description mentioned coordination across international teams and experience navigating complex regulatory environments. It was the closest thing to her old work she'd seen in years. She clicked the scheduling link before she could talk herself out of it. The night before the interview, Amina couldn't sleep. She lay in bed next to Chaik, listening to him breathe, running through answers in her head. She'd researched the company obsessively. She knew their projects, their clients, their revenue model. She'd practiced her responses until they sounded rehearsed, then practiced again until they sounded natural. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she was preparing for a performance, not a conversation. At 2 a.m., she got up and stood in front of the bathroom mirror. "Tell us about yourself," she whispered. Her reflection stared back, 47 years old, grey creeping into her temples, exhaustion written in the lines around her eyes. She tried again. "I'm a dedicated professional with extensive experience in..." She stopped. The words felt like stones in her mouth. The truth was simpler and more complicated. "I used to be someone who built things. Then I spent 20 years making sure my daughter could become someone who builds things. Now I don't know who I am anymore." She went back to bed. Chaik stirred. "You're going to be fine," he murmured, half asleep. "You don't know that. I know you." He reached for her hand in the dark. "You built connectivity frameworks for entire regions. This is just a meeting." Amina wanted to believe him. She bought a blazer the next morning, charcoal grey, professional, still creased from the package. She printed 3 copies of her resume on premium paper. She set 4 alarms. She arrived at the VisaLink offices 30 minutes early. The building was all glass and steel, the kind of place that announced its importance before you even walked inside. Amina signed in at the front desk, received a visitor badge, and took the elevator to the 14th floor. The waiting area had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. 3 other candidates were already there, 2 men, 1 woman, all younger than Zara. One of them was on a video call, laughing about something. Another scrolled through LinkedIn on his phone, his resume casually folded in his jacket pocket. The woman sat with perfect posture, her tablet propped on her knee, reviewing what looked like a presentation deck. They all belonged here. Amina sat in the chair farthest from the window and folded her hands in her lap. She watched the other candidates get called in, one by one. Each interview lasted about 40 minutes. They emerged looking relaxed, shaking hands with the receptionist, making casual jokes. Amina was last. By the time her name was called, it was nearly 5 p.m. The interviewers had been at this all day. She could see it in their faces as she entered the conference room, the polite fatigue of people who had already made their decision and were simply checking a final box. "Ms. Okoye, thank you for coming in." Marcus extended his hand first, mid-40s, graying at the temples, the kind of professional handshake that communicated both warmth and efficiency. Jennifer was next, younger, sharper, her grip firm and brief. Ryan barely looked up from his laptop as he nodded. They sat across from her, tablets and coffee cups arranged between them like a barricade. "So," Marcus began, glancing at her resume, "walk us through your background." Amina had rehearsed this. She'd practiced the tone, confident but not arrogant, humble but not apologetic. She'd prepared a narrative that framed the gaps as intentional choices rather than desperate necessities. But sitting across from them, under the fluorescent lights, with their eyes on her resume and not her face, All her preparation crumbled. "I have a degree in industrial engineering from the University of Lagos," she began. "After graduating, I worked as a project coordinator for a telecommunications initiative focused on rural connectivity." And that was... Marcus checked the dates. 1998 to 2003. Yes. Then you moved to the United States. Yes. My husband had an opportunity here. We started a family. Jennifer glanced up. And you didn't pursue project management work after that? Amina felt the question like a blade. I focused on raising my daughter. I also worked in childcare to support our family. For how long? 16 years. The number hung in the air. Ryan finally looked up. And you think you can transition back into project management after that long away? It wasn't quite hostile, but it wasn't kind either. I believe my skills are transferable, Amina said carefully. I managed complex schedules, coordinated between multiple stakeholders, solved problems under resource constraints. With children, Jennifer said. It wasn't quite a question. Yes. Jennifer's expression didn't change, but Amina saw it anyway, the subtle dismissal, the mental note being filed away. Not serious. Not current. Not competitive. Marcus cleared his throat. Let's talk about your technical skills. Are you familiar with agile methodologies? Amina hesitated. She'd read about agile in her research. She understood the principles. But she'd never used the term professionally. I've studied agile frameworks, she said. In my previous work, we used adaptive project structures that responded to changing conditions on the ground. We worked in iterative phases, adjusted based on stakeholder feedback, and prioritized flexibility over rigid planning. It was the truth. It was also not the answer they wanted. Jennifer exchanged a glance with Ryan. Amina saw the message pass between them. She doesn't even know the terminology. What about software? Ryan asked. Do you have experience with Jira, Asana, MS Project? I'm proficient in Excel and familiar with project tracking systems, Amina said. I'm a fast learner and... Which version of Excel? Jennifer asked. The question was a trap, and Amina knew it. I used Excel 2003 in my last professional role, she said quietly. But I've been practicing with the current version. Jennifer's face did something small and devastating. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. The interview continued, but the energy had shifted. Amina could feel the room contracting around her, the questions becoming more perfunctory, the pauses growing longer. Marcus was kind. He asked thoughtful follow-ups, nodded at her answers, maintained eye contact. But even his kindness felt like pity. After 30 minutes, he glanced at Jennifer and Ryan. Some silent consensus passed between them. Do you have any questions for us? Marcus asked. It was the beginning of the end. Amina's mind went blank. She'd prepared questions. Smart questions. Questions that would demonstrate her interest and understanding of the company's mission. But all she could think was, this is it. This is over. Then she remembered something she'd seen on the company website. A single line in a project description. I noticed your work in Ghana, she said. The rural broadband expansion. Are you using phased deployment models, or are you trying to scale all at once? Marcus blinked. We're using phased models. Why? I wondered, Amina said. Scaling infrastructure in underserved areas requires different strategies than urban deployment. You have to account for regulatory inconsistencies, community buy-in, resource supply chains that aren't reliable. If you move too fast, you lose stakeholder trust. For the first time in the entire interview, Marcus leaned forward. That's exactly the challenge we're facing, he said. Have you worked on projects like that? Yes, Amina said. In Lagos. The Northern Access Initiative. The room went quiet. Marcus set down his pen. The NAI. Yes. When? 2001 to 2003. Marcus stared at her. Then he looked down at her resume, scanning the dates, the sparse descriptions, the gaps. What did you do for the NAI? He asked slowly. Amina felt something shift. Not hope, exactly, but a door cracking open. I was part of the team that developed the original impact assessment protocols, she said. We created frameworks for stakeholder engagement, phased infrastructure rollout, and community impact analysis. It was meant for rural fiber deployment in northern Nigeria. Marcus's pen stopped moving entirely. The 2001 protocols, he asked. 2002, Amina corrected. We revised them after the first year. The original scope was too rigid for rural implementation. We needed more flexibility for. Those protocols became the foundation for Nigeria's national broadband plan, Marcus said. Amina blinked. I didn't know that. They did. They're still referenced in telecom compliance documentation. We used them last quarter for the Ghana project. Jennifer's tablet screen tilted up. Ryan stopped typing. Marcus looked at Amina like he was seeing her for the first time. You wrote those frameworks, he said. It wasn't a question, but Amina answered anyway. I co-wrote them, she said. With my team. Jennifer leaned forward. Why isn't that on your resume? Amina looked down at the paper between them, the single page that had taken her weeks to write, the careful omissions, the apologetic gaps. It is, she said quietly. You're looking at it. The silence that followed was different from before. Marcus pulled out his phone and started typing. I need to verify something, he muttered. A moment later, he turned his screen toward Jennifer. Look. It was a PDF, a 2003 white paper titled Stakeholder Engagement Frameworks for Rural Telecommunications Infrastructure. Amina's name was listed third among the authors. Jennifer scrolled through it, her expression changing. This is still cited. I know, Marcus said. He looked at Amina. I read this 6 months ago when we were preparing the Ghana proposal. I had no idea the author would be sitting in front of me. Amina didn't know what to say. Ryan finally spoke. If this work was so important, why did you stop? The question was blunt, but not unkind. Amina met his eyes. The project lost funding in 2003. The political situation in Nigeria changed, and international donors pulled out. By then, I was newly married, and my husband had an opportunity in the United States. I thought I was leaving the work behind. But you weren't, Marcus said. No, Amina said. Apparently not. Jennifer set down her tablet. I owe you an apology, she said. I made assumptions about your experience. That was wrong. Amina didn't know how to respond. She'd spent the entire interview bracing for dismissal. Apologies felt like a language she didn't speak anymore. Can you wait here for a moment? Marcus asked. I'd like to bring in our VP of Infrastructure. He's going to want to meet you. Amina sat alone in the conference room for 10 minutes. Through the glass walls, she could see Marcus on his phone, pacing. Jennifer was typing furiously on her tablet. Ryan had left, then returned with a printed document. She pulled out her phone and texted Zara. I think they actually listened. 3 dots appeared immediately. Then, I told you. Call me after. The door opened. A man in his 50s entered, wearing a dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He had the kind of face that suggested he'd spent years in the field before ending up behind a desk. Ms. Okoye, he said, extending his hand. I'm David Chen, VP of Infrastructure. Marcus tells me you worked on the NAI protocols. I did, Amina said. Those protocols saved us 6 months on the Ghana project, David said, sitting across from her. We were hitting roadblocks with community stakeholders, and someone on my team pulled your framework from the archives. It was exactly what we needed." He opened a folder and slid a document across the table. "This is our current project pipeline," he said. "Kenya, the Philippines, rural India. Every single one of these is going to require the kind of work you did 20 years ago. We need people who understand infrastructure at the community level, not just the technical side, but the human side." Amina looked at the document, then back at him. "I've been out of the industry for a long time." "I know," David said. "And I'm not going to pretend that doesn't matter. But experience isn't just about how recently you worked. It's about whether you understand the problems we're trying to solve." He leaned back. "Let me ask you something. If you were managing the Kenya project, and the local government suddenly changed the permitting requirements 3 months into deployment, what would you do?" Amina didn't hesitate. "I'd pull the project team together and assess which work could continue under the new requirements. Then I'd meet with the government officials, not to argue, but to understand why the requirements changed. Usually, it's about something we missed. If we can address their concerns and adjust the timeline, we keep stakeholder trust. If we can't, we pause and regroup." David smiled. "That's the right answer." He closed the folder. "I can't make you an offer today. We have a process. But I want you to come back next week for a second interview. And I want you to meet the team you'd be working with." Amina felt something unfamiliar rising in her chest. Not relief. Not even hope. Recognition. "Thank you," she said. Amina walked out of the building into the early evening light. The train ride home felt different. She looked at her resume in her bag, the same page she'd been carrying all day, and saw it with new eyes. It wasn't an apology. It was a record. Her phone buzzed. "Zara." "Well?" Amina smiled and typed back, "They saw me." That night, Chaik came home from work to find her sitting at the kitchen table, her laptop open, updating her resume. "How did it go?" he asked. "They knew my work," Amina said. "They didn't know me, but they knew my work." Chaik kissed the top of her head. "I told you." "You did." She saved the document and closed her laptop. She didn't know yet if she'd get the job. But for the first time in years, she knew something more important. The work she'd done mattered. It had outlasted her memory of it. It had traveled farther than she ever had. And maybe that was enough. 3 weeks later, Amina received an offer letter. She started the following Monday. On her first day, she walked into the office and saw her own framework printed on the wall of the conference room, a diagram she'd drawn by hand in Lagos 23 years ago, now digitized and labeled as foundational methodology. She stood in front of it for a long time. Then she went to work. Amina sat at the kitchen table at 11:33 p.m., the laptop screen casting blue light across her face. The job posting had been open in her browser for 40 minutes. Project Manager, VisaLink Solutions Experience, 5+ years in telecommunications or infrastructure project skills, Agile methodology, stakeholder coordination, international project experience preferred. She'd read it 6 times. Each time, a different reason not to apply presented itself. 5 years of experience. She had 5 months of current experience if she counted the online courses she'd been taking. The rest was ancient history, work done in a different country, a different lifetime, under different name before marriage made her Amina Okoye instead of Amina Adeyemi. Her cursor hovered over the browser tab. 1 click and it would disappear. Mom. Amina startled. Zara stood in the doorway in an oversized Barclay sweatshirt, holding her phone. "I thought you were asleep," Amina said. "I was texting with Nonso." Zara pulled out the chair across from her. "What are you doing?" "Nothing. Just looking." Zara tilted her head to read the screen upside down. VisaLink Solutions. "Are you applying?" "I don't think so." "Why not?" Amina gestured at the screen helplessly. "Look at what they're asking for." Zara leaned closer, reading. When she looked up, her expression was the particular blend of frustration and affection that only daughters can produce. Mom, you literally did this work 20 years ago. So? You think the people working there now invented project management? It's different now. Everything's different. The software, the terminology. You can learn software. You've been learning software for 3 months. Amina closed her eyes. Zara, I appreciate. No. Zara's voice sharpened. You're going to listen to me for once. I work with engineers at my internship who can barely send an email without CCing the wrong people. I watch them fumble through presentations they clearly didn't prepare for. And you know what they all have in common. Amina waited. They're not half as smart as you, and they're not even a little bit scared of failing. That's because they can afford to fail. Maybe, Zara said, but you can afford to try. The words landed somewhere deep. Amina looked at her daughter, 20 years old, brilliant, fearless in ways Amina had never been. Everything Amina had worked for was sitting across from her in a Barclay sweatshirt, telling her to be brave. What if I embarrass myself? Amina asked quietly. What if you don't? After Zara went to bed, Amina opened the application portal. The form wanted everything: work history, education credentials, references, a cover letter explaining why she was the ideal candidate. She started with her name. That was easy. The education section came next. Bachelor of Science, Industrial Engineering, University of Lagos, 1998. She'd been 22 years old, top of her class, certain the world would make space for her. Employment history. Project Coordinator, Northern Access Initiative, Lagos, Nigeria. January 2001 to August 2003. Her hand stopped on the keyboard. She could see the office, cramped, hot, perpetually without reliable electricity. She could see her desk, buried in maps and feasibility studies and stakeholder reports written in 3 languages. She could see Samuel, her manager, who'd trusted her with impossible problems. She could see the framework documents she'd written by hand, then typed on a shared computer, then photocopied and distributed to government offices across 3 states. She'd been good at that work. Better than good. Then the funding disappeared. The project collapsed. She married Chaik and moved to New Jersey, 6 months pregnant, speaking English with an accent that made people ask her to repeat herself. The American job market had no space for her. So she made herself smaller. Took the jobs that didn't require resumes. Cleaned houses. Watched children. Kept her family afloat while Chaik worked his way up from warehouse floor to warehouse supervisor. And now she was supposed to summarize all of that in bullet points. August 2003 to December 2017. Childcare provider January 2018. Present. Private childcare, Brennan family. It looked worse written down. A canyon of time with nothing to show for it but survival. She moved to the references section. Mrs. Brennan had written her a lovely letter, handwritten on floral stationery, talking about how wonderful Amina was with the children, how reliable, how trustworthy. It smelled like lavender and failure. Amina stared at the screen until the words blurred. This was pointless. They would see her resume and dismiss her in 30 seconds. Foreign degree. Massive gaps. Current job babysitting. She was wasting their time and her own. Her finger moved toward the delete button. Then she thought about Zara's face. You can afford to try. She thought about Chaik, working 60-hour weeks at 53 years old because someone had to. She thought about herself at 25, writing frameworks that she believed would matter. At 11:47 p.m., Amina clicked submit. The confirmation page loaded. Thank you for your application. You will hear from us within 2 weeks if your qualifications match our current needs. She closed the laptop and sat in the dark kitchen, heart pounding like she'd done something dangerous. 14 days later, her phone buzzed during the morning school drop-off with the Brennan children. Visa Link Solutions. We'd like to invite you for an interview. Amina pulled the car over. She read the message 3 times to make sure it was real. Then she read it a 4th time because her hands were shaking too badly to do anything else. The interview was scheduled for the following Thursday at 4 p.m. She had 6 days to prepare. 6 days to become someone they might actually hire. She called Chaik from the parking lot. "They want to interview me," she said when he picked up. "I knew they would. I don't know what to wear. I don't know what to say. I don't even know if I can." "Amina." His voice was steady. "You can." That night, she bought a blazer online. Charcoal gray, $73, the most she'd spent on clothing in 5 years. She watched YouTube videos about interview techniques. She practiced answering questions in the bathroom mirror while Chaik timed her. "Tell us about yourself. Why do you want this position? What's your greatest weakness?" Every answer sounded wrong. By Wednesday night, she'd rewritten her talking points so many times they'd lost all meaning. "Maybe I should cancel," she told Chaik. "You're not canceling. They're going to see right through me." "Good," he said. "Let them see you." Thursday arrived like a sentencing. Amina put on the blazer. It was slightly too big in the shoulders, slightly too tight across the hips, and still creased from the shipping package despite her careful ironing. She looked in the mirror and saw someone pretending to be professional. The interview was at 4 p.m. At 3:17 p.m., sitting in her car outside the VisaLink building, watching younger candidates walk through the glass doors with easy confidence, Amina realized she'd made a terrible mistake. These people belonged here. She did not. But she'd come this far. She picked up her folder, 3 printed resumes, the lavender-scented letter from Mrs. Brennan, notes she'd taken on the company, and stepped out of the car. The building's lobby was marble and glass and cold air conditioning. Amina signed in at the desk, received a visitor badge, and took the elevator to the 14th floor. The waiting area had windows overlooking the entire city. 3 other candidates sat in the modern chairs, all of them younger, all of them comfortable. Amina took the seat farthest from everyone and folded her hands in her lap. One by one, the other candidates were called. By the time the receptionist said her name, it was 4:53 p.m. The interview panel had been doing this all day. She could see it in their faces the moment she walked in. Amina started her research at 6 a.m. the next morning, while Chaik was still asleep and the house was quiet enough to think. VisaLink Solutions had a website that looked expensive. Clean lines, professional photography, testimonials from clients in 12 countries. She clicked through every page, taking notes in a spiral notebook she'd found in Zara's old room. Founded 2011. Telecommunications infrastructure. Developing markets. Ghana, Kenya, Philippines, rural India. She wrote down the names of their executives, their major projects, the terminology they used. Phased deployment. Stakeholder engagement. Community-centered design. The words felt familiar and foreign at the same time, like a language she used to speak fluently but had only practiced in her head for 20 years. By 8 a.m., she'd filled 6 pages. By 10 a.m., she'd watched 3 YouTube videos on modern project management methodology and felt more lost than when she'd started. One video featured a woman in her 30s explaining agile frameworks with a kind of casual confidence that suggested she'd never doubted her right to be in the room. She used terms like sprint planning and Scrum Master and iterative development without pausing to define them. Amina rewound the video 3 times, writing down definitions, trying to map these new words onto the work she'd done in Lagos. Sprint planning equals phased rollout schedule, Scrum Master equals project coordinator, iterative development equals adaptive implementation. It was the same work, just different vocabulary. She told herself that should feel reassuring. It didn't. That evening, she stood in front of the bathroom mirror, practicing. "My background is in telecommunications infrastructure," she said to her reflection. "I have experience coordinating complex projects across multiple stakeholders in resource-constrained environments." The words sounded rehearsed. Performative. She tried again. Softer. I worked on rural connectivity projects in Nigeria. We developed frameworks for. No. Too apologetic. I specialized in stakeholder engagement and phased infrastructure deployment. Too technical. They'd know she was reading from a script. She tried 15 different versions. Each one felt worse than the last. Chaik appeared in the doorway. How long have you been in here? Amina glanced at her phone. An hour. Amina. I need to get this right. He stepped into the bathroom, leaning against the doorframe. What are you trying to get right? The way I explain my experience. It has to sound current, relevant, like I know what I'm talking about. You do know what you're talking about. Not in their language. Chaik was quiet for a moment. Then he said, you built connectivity frameworks for entire regions. This is a meeting, not a judgment. Amina looked at him in the mirror. It's both. Maybe, he said. But you've survived worse than a job interview. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to feel the certainty in his voice and let it become her own. But all she could see was the woman in the mirror, 47 years old, graying at the temples, wearing a blazer that didn't quite fit, pretending to be someone she used to be. On Tuesday, she took the bus to the mall. The professional clothing stores made her feel like an imposter before she even walked in. Everything was tailored, expensive, designed for women who'd never had to choose between a blazer and groceries. She found one on sale, charcoal gray, marked down from $180 to $73. The shoulders were slightly too big, the hips slightly too tight. But it looked professional under the fluorescent lights, and that was all that mattered. The cashier folded it with tissue paper and placed it in a branded bag. Amina carried it home like evidence. That night, she ironed it 3 times, trying to smooth out the creases from the shipping package. The fabric resisted. By the 3rd pass, she'd made it worse. She hung it in the closet and told herself it would be fine. Wednesday morning, she printed her resume at the library. The printer jammed twice. When the pages finally came out, the margins were slightly off, making the text look cramped and desperate. She printed 3 more copies, adjusted the settings, printed again. The librarian watched her with patient sympathy. On her 6th attempt, the copies came out clean. She slipped them into a folder and left before she could second-guess the font choice. Wednesday night, she couldn't sleep. She lay next to Chaik, staring at the ceiling, running through questions in her head. Tell us about yourself. Why do you want this position? What makes you qualified? Explain this gap. Every answer she'd practiced felt hollow. She could hear the doubt in her own voice before she even spoke. At 2 a.m., she got up and went to the kitchen. The interview was in 13 hours. She opened her notebook and read through her research again, looking for something that would make her feel less like a fraud. VisaLink's Ghana project had stalled 6 months ago due to regulatory complications. Their Kenya project was behind schedule. Their Philippines initiative was struggling with community pushback. She knew these problems. She'd solved these problems. But knowing and proving were different things. At 3:30 a.m., Chaik found her at the kitchen table. Come to bed, he said. I can't. Amina. What if I freeze? The words came out sharper than she intended. What if I get in there and I can't remember how to talk about my own work? What if they ask me something and I just blank? Chaik sat down across from her. Then you'll figure it out. Like you always do. This is different. Why? Because I need this. Her voice cracked. We need this. And I can't afford to fail. Chaik reached across the table and took her hand. His palm was rough from warehouse work, warm and steady. You're not going to fail, he said. Amina wanted desperately to believe him. Thursday arrived like a verdict. She woke up at 6 a.m. even though her first alarm wasn't set until 7. She'd set 4 alarms, 6:30, 7 o'clock, 7:15, 7:30. because some irrational part of her believed she might sleep through all of them. She showered, dried her hair, put on the blazer. It still didn't fit right. She looked in the mirror and saw someone trying too hard. By 3 p.m., she was sitting in her car outside the Visa Link building, watching people come and go through the glass doors. They all walked with purpose. They all belonged. At 3:27 p.m., she picked up her folder and stepped out of the car. The lobby was cold and marble and intimidating. She signed in, received her visitor badge, took the elevator to the 14th floor. The waiting area was full of younger candidates, 2 men, 1 woman, all of them scrolling through phones with the casual confidence of people who'd never had to explain a 20-year gap. Amina took the seat farthest from everyone and folded her hands in her lap. The other candidates were called one by one. By 4:45 p.m., Amina was alone in the waiting room. By 4:53 p.m., the receptionist finally called her name. She stood, smoothed her blazer, and walked toward the conference room. Through the glass walls, she could see them. 3 people sitting behind a table, tablets and coffee cups scattered between them. They looked tired. They looked like they'd already made their decision. Amina reached for the door handle, and for one terrible moment, she considered turning around and walking away. But then the door opened from the inside, and a man in his 40s stood there with his hand extended. "Ms. Okoye," he said. "Thank you for coming in. I'm Marcus Chen." There was no turning back now. Amina arrived at 3:30 p.m. for her 4 p.m. interview. The waiting area on the 14th floor was all glass and minimalist furniture, the kind of space designed to make you feel both impressed and uncomfortable. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. Abstract art hung on the walls. Everything was clean and expensive and deliberate. 3 other candidates were already there. The closest was a man in his late 20s, sitting with one ankle crossed over his knee, scrolling through his phone. His suit looked tailored. His resume sat casually on the chair beside him, like an afterthought. Across from him, a woman about the same age was typing on her laptop, earbuds in, completely absorbed. Her blazer was navy blue and fit perfectly. She looked like she'd walked out of a LinkedIn advertisement. The third candidate, another man, early 30s, was on a video call, his voice low but confident. He laughed at something, then said, "Yeah, I'll loop back with you after this. Should be quick." Should be quick. Like the interview was just a formality. Like the job was already his. Amina took the seat farthest from all of them, near the window. She set her folder on her lap and folded her hands on top of it. Then she realized she was gripping it too tightly and forced herself to relax. Then she worried she looked too relaxed and sat up straighter. The receptionist glanced up from her desk and smiled professionally. "Ms. Okoye? You're scheduled for 4 o'clock, correct?" "Yes," Amina said. "Perfect. They're running right on time. Can I get you water or coffee?" "No, thank you." The receptionist went back to her computer. Amina watched the other candidates and catalogued all the ways she didn't belong. The man on the phone ended his call and immediately opened LinkedIn on his tablet. His profile photo showed him at some professional conference, wearing a name tag and holding a drink. His headline read, "Senior Program Manager, Telecommunications Infrastructure, Driving Impact Across Emerging Markets." Amina didn't have a LinkedIn profile. She tried to make one last week and given up after staring at the empty experience section for 20 minutes. The woman with the laptop closed it and pulled out her phone. Her lock screen was a photo of her standing in front of a whiteboard covered in flowcharts, surrounded by colleagues. Everyone was smiling. Amina's lock screen was a photo of Zara at her high school graduation. She glanced down at her folder. The edge was bent slightly from where she'd gripped it too hard in the elevator. She smoothed it out, then worried that smoothing it made it more noticeable. She was sitting too stiffly. She knew she was sitting too stiffly. But when she tried to relax, her shoulders felt wrong, and she couldn't figure out where to put her hands. On her lap. Too formal. On the armrests. Too casual. Folded. She'd already tried that. The man with the tailored suit glanced up from his phone and caught her eye. He smiled politely. Amina smiled back. Too quickly, too wide. He looked away. She felt her face flush. At 3:47 p.m., a woman in her 30s emerged from the conference room and called the first candidate's name. James Porter. The man with the tailored suit stood, picked up his resume, and followed her inside. Through the glass walls, Amina could see him shaking hands with the interview panel, 3 people sitting behind a long table. He sat down, crossed one ankle over his knee again, and said something that made one of the interviewers laugh. Amina looked away. The woman with the laptop and the man who'd been on the video call were both watching their phones now, completely at ease. Amina pulled out her own phone to look busy, then realized she had nothing to look at. She opened her email. Nothing new. She opened her text messages. The last one was from Chike this morning. You're going to do great. I love you. She closed her phone and set it on top of her folder. Then she picked it up again because leaving it there felt too deliberate. She was overthinking everything. The minutes crawled. At 4:28 p.m., James Porter emerged from the conference room, still smiling. He shook hands with the woman who'd called him in, said something Amina couldn't hear, and walked past the waiting area without looking at anyone. He looked satisfied. At 4:31 p.m., the woman came back. Sarah Kim. The woman with the laptop stood, tucked it under her arm, and walked into the conference room with the kind of easy confidence Amina envied. Through the glass, Amina watched her sit down, shake hands, smile warmly at something one of the interviewers said. Sarah had presence. She took up space without apologizing for it. Amina tried to imagine herself doing the same. She couldn't. The man who'd been on the video call was called at 5:09 p.m. He walked in like he already worked there. By now, the interviewers looked tired. One of them was rubbing his temples. Another was refilling her coffee from a thermos. They'd been doing this for hours. Amina was going to be the last person they saw today. The final obligation before they could leave. She watched the clock. 5:41 p.m. 5:48 p.m. At 5:52 p.m., the video call man came out, thanked the receptionist, and left. Amina was alone in the waiting area now. The receptionist glanced at her, then at her computer screen, then back at Amina. They'll be with you in just a moment, Ms. Okoye. Thank you. Amina's hands were sweating. She wiped them on her skirt, then worried about leaving marks. Through the glass walls, she could see the interview panel conferring. One of them pointed at something on a tablet. Another nodded. The third, a woman, stood and stretched, her body language screaming exhaustion. They weren't excited to meet her. They were finishing a task. At 5:58 p.m., the door opened. The man who'd been rubbing his temples earlier stood there, his tie loosened, his expression polite but distant. Ms. Okoye. Amina stood, gripping her folder. Yes. I'm Marcus Chen, Senior Project Manager. Come on in. His handshake was brief and professional. He gestured toward the chair across from the panel. Amina walked into the conference room. The other 2 interviewers were still seated. The woman, younger, maybe early 30s, looked up from her tablet with an expression Amina recognized immediately. Skepticism. The third interviewer, a man in his late 20s, didn't look up at all. He was typing something on his laptop. Amina sat down. Marcus returned to his seat and glanced at her resume, the same one she'd agonized over for weeks. He set it on the table between them. So, he said, tell us about yourself. The question she'd practiced 100 times. And suddenly, every answer she'd prepared disappeared. Amina opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Marcus waited. The woman, her name tag said Jennifer, tilted her head slightly, her expression shifting from skeptical to concerned. Amina's throat felt tight. She started. The younger man finally looked up from his laptop. All 3 of them were watching her now. Waiting. And Amina realized with sudden, crushing certainty that she had approximately 5 seconds to prove she wasn't wasting their time, or this interview was already over. Amina forced herself to breathe. "I have a background in industrial engineering," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I worked as a project coordinator in Lagos, Nigeria, focused on telecommunications infrastructure. After moving to the United States, I spent time raising my daughter while also working in childcare. Now that she's in college, I'm ready to return to project management." The words came out exactly as she'd practiced them. Professional. Concise. Apologetic. Marcus nodded politely and made a note on his tablet. Jennifer didn't move. Ryan, the younger man, glanced at his laptop screen, then back at her resume. His expression was carefully neutral, which somehow felt worse than skepticism. "And what draws you to VisaLink specifically?" Marcus asked. This one she'd prepared for too. "Your work in developing markets aligns with my previous experience," Amina said. "I'm particularly interested in how you approach community engagement in infrastructure projects. I saw on your website that you're working in Ghana and Kenya, and I think my background in rural connectivity could—" "Let's talk about that background," Jennifer interrupted. She leaned forward slightly, her tablet angled toward her chest. "Your resume says you worked on the Northern Access Initiative from 2001 to 2003. Can you tell us what that involved?" Amina heard the subtext, "Prove this was real work. I was part of a team coordinating fiber optic deployment in underserved regions of northern Nigeria," Amina said. "We worked with local governments, international donors, and community stakeholders to establish connectivity infrastructure where none existed." "What was your specific role?" Jennifer asked. "I managed stakeholder engagement and impact assessments. I created frameworks for phased deployment, coordinated between government offices and field teams, tracked budgets and timelines." "Frameworks," Jennifer repeated. "Can you be more specific?" Amina felt the ground shifting beneath her. "We developed protocols for community consultation, resource allocation, and adaptive implementation based on changing conditions." Jennifer's eyes didn't leave her tablet. "And these protocols, were they formalized? Documented?" "Yes. We created standardized assessment tools, stakeholder mapping systems, rollout schedules." "Using what software?" The question landed like a trap. "We used Excel for tracking," Amina said, "and Word for documentation. Most of the government offices we worked with didn't have sophisticated systems, so we had to keep things accessible." "Excel 2003?" Jennifer asked. Amina's stomach dropped. "Yes." Jennifer glanced at Ryan. Something passed between them, a look that said exactly what Amina feared. "She's not current. She's not competitive. She's not what we need." Marcus cleared his throat. "Let's move forward. Where do you see yourself in 5 years, Ms. Okoye?" Amina had practiced this answer too, but it felt hollow now. "I want to be managing complex infrastructure projects," she said, "contributing to meaningful connectivity initiatives in communities that need them most. Building on the work I started in Lagos." Ryan finally spoke. "That was over 20 years ago." It wasn't quite a question. "Yes," Amina said. "And in the time since, you've been working in childcare?" "Yes." The silence stretched. Marcus shifted in his seat. "Ms. Okoye, I want to be direct with you. This role requires someone who can hit the ground running with current methodologies and tools. Can you speak to your experience with agile frameworks? Scrum? Sprint planning?" Amina felt her chest tighten. "I'm not familiar with those specific terms," she said carefully. "But in my work in Lagos, we used adaptive project structures that sound similar. We worked in iterative phases, adjusted based on stakeholder feedback, prioritized flexibility over rigid timelines." She was describing the same work. She knew she was describing the same work. But the words weren't landing right. Jennifer leaned back in her chair, her arms crossed. Agile is pretty fundamental to how we operate here, if you haven't worked with it. I understand the principles, Amina said, more forcefully than she intended. I may not know the current terminology, but I've managed projects that required constant adaptation, stakeholder coordination, and responsive implementation under resource constraints. The fundamentals are the same. The fundamentals have evolved significantly, Jennifer said. Her tone was professional, but the message was clear. Modern project management requires familiarity with specific tools and frameworks. Jira, Asana, MS Project. Agile certification is standard. I'm a fast learner, Amina said. She heard the desperation in her voice and hated it. I've been taking online courses in. Which courses? Ryan asked. Amina's mind went blank. She'd taken 3 different courses on Coursera. She'd watched dozens of YouTube videos. But in this moment, under their collective gaze, she couldn't remember a single title. Project Management Fundamentals, she said weakly. Through Coursera. Ryan made a note on his laptop. Jennifer's expression didn't change, but Amina could see her mentally moving on. The interview wasn't over, but the decision was already made. Marcus tried to steer them back. Let's talk about your stakeholder management experience. In your Lagos work, who were your primary stakeholders? Amina grabbed onto the question like a lifeline. We worked with government officials at the state and federal level, international donors from the World Bank and African Development Bank, local community leaders, telecom contractors, and the end users in rural communities. Each group had different priorities and different levels of technical understanding, so we had to create communication strategies that worked across all of them. How did you manage conflicts between stakeholders? Marcus asked. By understanding what each party actually needed versus what they said they wanted, Amina said. The government wanted measurable results for political capital. The donors wanted data proving impact. The communities wanted reliable service. When conflicts arose, we looked for solutions that addressed the underlying needs rather than just the surface-level demands. For the first time, Marcus looked genuinely interested. Can you give me an example? Amina thought back 23 years. We had a situation where the government wanted to accelerate deployment to meet an election year deadline, she said. But our field assessments showed that the communities weren't ready. We hadn't done enough groundwork on maintenance training or local infrastructure support. If we'd rushed it, the systems would have failed within months, which would have hurt everyone. So we proposed a compromise. We accelerated deployment in areas where readiness was high, and used those early wins to demonstrate success while continuing preparation in other regions. The government got their headline. The communities got sustainable infrastructure. And we maintained stakeholder trust. Marcus nodded. Smart. But Jennifer wasn't convinced. That's great historical context, she said. But this role requires real-time coordination across international teams using digital collaboration tools. Have you ever managed a remote team? Used Slack or Microsoft Teams? Coordinated across multiple time zones with asynchronous communication? Amina hesitated. I've communicated with international partners through email, she said. And phone calls. Jennifer's expression said everything. Ryan glanced at his watch. The room felt smaller. Marcus tapped his pen against his tablet. Ms. Okoye, let me ask you something else. This position involves significant travel, potentially 30% of the time, including to our project sites in Ghana, Kenya, and the Philippines. Is that something you're prepared for? Amina hadn't thought about travel. 30% meant weeks away from home, away from Chike, away from the life she'd built. But she needed this job. Yes, she said. I can travel. And your family situation allows for that flexibility? Jennifer asked. The question felt invasive, but Amina answered it. My daughter is in college. My husband is supportive. I can travel as needed. Jennifer made a note on her tablet. The silence that followed was suffocating. Marcus looked at Jennifer, then at Ryan. Some unspoken communication passed between them. Do you have any questions for us? Marcus asked. It was the beginning of the end. Amina recognized the tone. Polite, professional, final. Her mind raced. She had prepared questions. Smart questions that would demonstrate her research and interest. But in this moment, with 3 people who had already decided she wasn't good enough, those questions felt pointless. Then she remembered something from the website. A small detail buried in a project description. I noticed your Ghana project involves rural broadband expansion, Amina said. Are you using phased deployment models, or trying to scale all at once? Marcus's pen stopped tapping. Phased, he said slowly. Why do you ask? Because scaling infrastructure in underserved areas requires different strategies than urban deployment, Amina said. The words came easier now, more natural. You have to account for regulatory inconsistencies, community buy-in, supply chains that aren't reliable. If you move too fast, you lose stakeholder trust. If you move too slow, you lose donor confidence. The phasing has to be strategic. For the first time in the entire interview, Marcus leaned forward. That's exactly the challenge we're facing, he said. We're 6 months behind schedule because we underestimated the community engagement component. How would you approach that? Amina didn't hesitate. I'd go back to the communities, she said. Not to sell them on the project, but to understand what we missed. Usually when community buy-in fails, it's because we didn't listen carefully enough the first time. There's some need we're not addressing, or some concern we dismissed. You can't fix that with better marketing. You fix it by actually solving the problem they're telling you about. Marcus set down his pen entirely. Have you worked on projects like this? He asked. Yes, Amina said. In Lagos. The Northern Access Initiative. What years? 2001 to 2003. Marcus stared at her for a long moment. Then he looked down at her resume, scanning the dates, the descriptions. His expression changed. What exactly did you do for the Northern Access Initiative? He asked, his voice different now, sharper, more focused. And Amina realized that everything that came next depended on how she answered this question. Amina met Marcus's eyes. I was part of the team that developed the original impact assessment protocols for the Northern Access Initiative, she said. We created frameworks for stakeholder engagement, phased infrastructure rollout, and community impact analysis. The work was designed specifically for rural fiber deployment in regions with limited existing infrastructure. Marcus's pen had stopped moving entirely. The NAI protocols, he said slowly. Yes. The 2001 protocols. 2002, Amina corrected. We revised them after the first year. The original scope was too rigid for rural implementation. We needed more flexibility for local variations, different governance structures, different community needs, different resource constraints. Marcus set his tablet down on the table. Jennifer glanced at him, confused. Ryan had finally stopped typing. Those protocols, Marcus said, his voice careful, became the foundation for Nigeria's national broadband plan. Amina blinked. I didn't know that. They did. They're still cited in telecommunications infrastructure documentation across West Africa. Marcus leaned forward. We referenced them last quarter when we were developing our Ghana proposal. The stakeholder mapping framework, the phased deployment structure, we borrowed heavily from that work. The room had gone completely silent. Amina felt something shift in her chest. Not quite hope, but something close to it. I co-wrote those frameworks, she said quietly, with my team. Samuel Okonkwo was our lead. I was the primary author on the stakeholder engagement protocols and the community impact assessments. Marcus pulled out his phone and started typing rapidly. What was the full name of the initiative? Northern Access Initiative. It was a joint project between the Nigerian Ministry of Communications and international donors, World Bank, African Development Bank, and a few private telecommunications companies. Marcus's fingers moved faster across his screen. Then he stopped, stared at whatever he'd found, and turned the phone toward Jennifer. Look. Jennifer leaned in. Her expression changed. Marcus turned the phone toward Amina. It was a PDF, a white paper from 2003 titled Stakeholder Engagement Frameworks for Rural Telecommunications Infrastructure, Lessons from the Northern Access Initiative. Amina's name was listed third among the authors. She'd forgotten that paper existed. This has been cited over 200 times, Marcus said. It's referenced in policy documents, academic research, industry best practices. We used it 6 months ago. Jennifer scrolled through the document on her own tablet, her earlier skepticism replaced by something harder to read. Ryan was staring at Amina like he'd never seen her before. Why isn't this on your resume? Jennifer asked. The edge in her voice was different now, not dismissive, but genuinely confused. Amina looked down at the folder in her lap, at the single page that had taken her weeks to write. It is, she said. You're looking at it. Marcus glanced at her resume again, scanning the sparse bullet points under Northern Access Initiative. Project coordination. Stakeholder engagement. Infrastructure assessment. It had seemed like padding when she'd written it. Evidence of a career that didn't matter anymore. This work is still being used, Marcus said. Right now. By us. By companies across 3 continents. I didn't know, Amina said again. She felt unsteady, like the ground beneath her had suddenly revealed itself to be something else entirely. The project lost funding in 2003. The political situation changed. The donors pulled out. I thought the work died with the project. It didn't, Marcus said. Jennifer set down her tablet. Ms. Okoye, I owe you an apology. The words landed strangely. Amina didn't know what to do with them. I made assumptions about your experience based on the gaps in your employment history, Jennifer continued. That was wrong. I should have asked better questions. Amina's throat felt tight. She'd spent the last 45 minutes being professionally dismantled, and now they were apologizing, and she didn't know which version of this conversation was real. The gap is real, Amina said. I haven't worked in this field for 21 years. I don't know agile methodology. I don't know Jira. I don't know half the tools you use. But you understand the fundamentals, Marcus said. And the fundamentals are what we're missing. He glanced at Jennifer and Ryan. Some silent communication passed between them. Ms. Okoye, Marcus said, would you be willing to wait here for a few minutes? I'd like to bring someone else into this conversation. Amina's heart stuttered. Who? Our Vice President of Infrastructure, David Chen. He's the one who pulled your white paper for the Ghana project. I think he needs to meet you. It wasn't quite an offer. But it wasn't a dismissal either. Yes, Amina said. I can wait. Marcus stood. I'll be right back. He left the conference room, his phone already to his ear. Jennifer and Ryan remained seated across from Amina. The silence was different now. Not hostile, but uncertain. Jennifer broke it first. Can I ask you something? Yes. Why did you stop? If your work was this significant, why didn't you continue in the field? Amina had been asked versions of this question dozens of times. Usually by people who genuinely couldn't imagine choosing anything over a career. My husband got a job opportunity in the United States, she said. I was pregnant. The NAI was collapsing. And when I got here, no one was hiring a Nigerian woman with a foreign degree and no American work experience. So I did what I had to do to keep my family afloat. Jennifer nodded slowly. She didn't say anything else. Ryan was looking at his laptop again, but this time he seemed to be reading something specific. After a moment, he turned the screen toward Jennifer. "Look at this," he said quietly. Jennifer leaned in. Her eyes widened slightly. Amina couldn't see what they were reading, but she watched their expressions shift. Through the glass walls of the conference room, she could see Marcus in the hallway, pacing while he talked on the phone. His gestures were animated. He looked energized in a way he hadn't during the interview. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Amina sat with her hands folded in her lap, trying not to hope too hard. Jennifer and Ryan were still reading whatever was on Ryan's laptop, occasionally murmuring to each other. Finally, the door opened. Marcus walked in, followed by a man in his 50s wearing a dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He had the kind of face that suggested he'd spent years in the field before ending up in management. "Ms. Okoye," Marcus said, "this is David Chen, our VP of Infrastructure." David extended his hand. His grip was firm and warm. "It's an honor to meet you," he said, sitting down across from her. "Marcus tells me you worked on the Northern Access Initiative." "I did." David opened a folder and slid a document across the table. It was her white paper. The one she'd written 23 years ago, sitting at a desk in Lagos with inconsistent electricity and impossible deadlines. "This saved us 6 months on the Ghana project," David said. "We were hitting roadblocks with community stakeholders, the same issues you outlined in Section 4. Local leadership structures that didn't map onto our organizational charts. Community needs that our impact assessments weren't capturing. We were about to restart the entire consultation process when someone on my team found this paper." He tapped the document. "We used your stakeholder mapping framework and your phased engagement protocols. It worked. We're back on track." Amina stared at the paper. At her own name, printed at the top. "I'm glad it helped," she said. "It did more than help," David said. "It gave us a roadmap we didn't know existed." He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Marcus says you're interested in the project manager position." "Yes." "Can I ask you a question?" "Of course." "If we hired you tomorrow and put you on the Ghana project, what would be your first priority?" Amina didn't hesitate. "I'd read every piece of stakeholder feedback we'd collected so far," she said. "Then I'd identify the gaps, the voices we're not hearing, the concerns we're not addressing. Then I'd go talk to the communities directly. Not to sell them on what we're doing, but to understand what we're missing." David smiled. It was the first genuine smile she'd seen from anyone in this room. "When can you start?" The question hung in the air. Amina's breath caught. "Are you offering me the position?" she asked. David glanced at Marcus, then at Jennifer and Ryan. "I'd like to," he said. "But I need to be honest with you about something first." The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "The position you applied for isn't the right fit," David continued. "It requires someone who's already embedded in our current systems and tools. You'd spend 6 months just getting up to speed, and we don't have 6 months." Amina felt the floor disappearing beneath her again. "However," David said, "we have a different role opening up. Senior infrastructure consultant, focused specifically on community engagement and stakeholder management for our West Africa projects. It's a newly created position. The salary is higher, but so are the expectations. You'd be traveling frequently, probably 40% of the time. Kenya, Ghana, potentially Nigeria if we expand there." He paused. "The role would report directly to me, and I'd need someone who can start in 2 weeks." Amina's mind raced. Higher salary, more travel, more responsibility. Everything she'd wanted. Everything she'd been terrified to hope for. "There's one catch," David said. And Amina's heart sank. "What's the catch?" Amina asked. David folded his hands on the table. "The position requires someone who can operate independently in challenging environments. You'd be on the ground in communities where our other consultants have struggled, places where the infrastructure is minimal, where trust in foreign companies is low, where the work is slow and difficult. He paused. You'd be essentially alone out there. Our field teams would support you logistically, but the stakeholder work, the community relationships, the consultation processes, the trust building, that would all fall on you. And if you can't build that trust, the projects stall. Millions of dollars, hundreds of jobs, entire communities' access to connectivity, all of it depends on getting this part right. Amina's pulse quickened. The last person we had in this role burned out in 8 months, David continued. The one before that lasted 6. It's not just about competence. It's about resilience. And I need to know you understand what you'd be signing up for. The room was silent. Marcus was watching her carefully. Jennifer had her arms crossed, but her expression was thoughtful, not skeptical. Ryan was typing again, but slower now, like he was taking real notes. I understand, Amina said. Do you? David leaned forward. Because I'm looking at your resume, and I see someone who spent the last 20 years in stability, raising a family, working consistent hours, building a life that's predictable. This job is the opposite of that. He wasn't being cruel. He was being honest. And Amina appreciated that more than she could say. You're right, she said. I've spent 20 years building stability. But before that, I spent 5 years working in environments where nothing was stable, where electricity was unreliable, where funding could disappear overnight, where political situations could change everything in a week. I know what that work costs. And I'm not going into this with illusions. David studied her face. Why do you want this? He asked. It was the first time anyone had asked her that question directly. Not why are you qualified or why should we hire you, but why do you want this? Amina could have given him the safe answer, the one about professional growth and meaningful work and contributing to important projects. But something about the way he asked made her tell the truth. Because I need to know if I'm still the person who could do that work, she said quietly. I spent 20 years being someone else. Being a mother, a wife, a caregiver. And those things mattered. They still matter. But I need to know if the person I was before all of that is still in here somewhere. She pressed a hand to her chest. And I need my daughter to see that it's possible to come back from disappearing. David's expression softened slightly. Your daughter, he said. She's in college now. Yes. Berkeley. And she's okay with you taking a job that requires this much travel? Amina almost laughed. She's the one who made me apply. David nodded. And your husband? He supports it. Even knowing you'd be gone 40% of the time. The question hit harder than Amina expected. She thought about Chaik, working 60-hour weeks, coming home exhausted, never complaining. She thought about the life they'd built together. Not glamorous, not easy, but theirs. If she took this job, that life would change. He knows what this means to me, Amina said. And he wants me to have it. David was quiet for a moment. Then he stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the city. I'm going to be direct with you, Ms. Okoye, he said, his back still turned. I want to hire you. I think you're exactly what we need for this role. But I also think you need time to really consider what you'd be agreeing to. He turned around. I'm not going to make you an offer today, he said. I'm going to send you home with a detailed job description, a proposed compensation package, and a realistic assessment of what the first year would look like. I want you to read it carefully. I want you to talk to your family. And then I want you to decide if this is actually what you want. Amina felt something twist in her chest. This was the offer. She could feel it. But he was making her wait. How long do I have? She asked. 3 days, David said. I need someone in this role quickly. If you say no, I have to start the search process over. But I'd rather you say no now than yes now and regret it in 3 months. He walked back to the table and sat down. Can you live with that timeline? Amina nodded. Yes. Good. David pulled out a business card and slid it across the table. My direct line. If you have questions before you make your decision, call me. Any time. Marcus stood up. I'll walk you out, Ms. Okoye. Amina gathered her folder, her hand steadier than they'd been an hour ago. Jennifer stood as well. Ms. Okoye, before you go, I really am sorry. About earlier. Amina met her eyes. You weren't wrong to ask those questions. The gaps are real. I would have asked them too. Jennifer smiled slightly. Still, I should have listened better. Ryan looked up from his laptop. For what it's worth, your framework is brilliant. I read the whole white paper just now. It's better than half the stuff we're using currently. Thank you, Amina said. Marcus held the door open for her. They walked through the hallway in silence, past the other conference rooms, past the open office space where people were still working despite the late hour. When they reached the elevator, Marcus pressed the button and turned to her. You're going to take it, right? He asked. Amina was surprised by the directness. I don't know yet, she said honestly. You should, Marcus said. Not because we need you, although we do, but because you're too good at this to keep pretending you're not. The elevator arrived. Amina stepped inside. 3 days, Marcus said as the doors began to close. But I think you already know your answer. The train ride home felt surreal. Amina sat with her folder in her lap, watching the city blur past the windows. Her phone buzzed. Zara, how'd it go? Amina stared at the message. How did it go? She'd walked in expecting to be dismissed. She'd been dismissed. For 45 minutes, she'd been professionally dismantled. And then everything had changed. She typed back, I'll call you when I get home. 3 dots appeared immediately, then disappeared. Then, you're killing me. Was it good or bad? Amina smiled despite herself. Complicated, she typed. I'll explain everything. She put her phone away and looked out the window again. Somewhere in her bag was the business card David had given her. On it was a phone number that connected to a man who wanted to give her a job that terrified her. A job that would take her away from Chaik. A job that would send her back to the kind of work that had defined her before she became a mother. A job that would pay her more than she'd ever earned in her life. A job that might break her. Or might save her. She didn't know which. The train pulled into her station. Amina stepped onto the platform, walked through the parking lot to her car, and sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine. She pulled out her phone and stared at Chaik's contact. She could call him now. Tell him everything. Ask him what to do. But this wasn't his decision to make. It was hers. And she had 3 days to make it. She started the car and drove home, the weight of the unsigned offer pressing against her chest like a hand. When she pulled into the driveway, Chaik was standing on the porch, waiting. He must have seen her headlights. Amina got out of the car slowly. Chaik walked down the steps toward her. Well, he asked. And Amina realized she had no idea how to explain what had just happened. They want to hire me, she said. Chaik's face broke into a smile. Amina. For a different position, she continued. One that requires 40% travel. One that would mean I'd be gone for weeks at a time. One that... She stopped. Chaik was still smiling, but it had changed. It was softer now. Sadder. You're going to say yes, he said. It wasn't a question. And Amina didn't know if it was true. I don't know, Amina said. Chaik held her gaze in the dim light of the driveway. Yes, you do, he said gently. Amina looked down at her hands. They were still trembling slightly from the adrenaline of the interview, the revelation, the offer that wasn't quite an offer yet. Come inside, Chaik said. Tell me everything. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where she'd submitted her application 6 weeks ago, the same table where she'd rewritten her resume 100 times. Amina told him about the interview. About the dismissal, the skepticism, the moment everything changed. About Marcus recognizing her work. About David Chen and the position that terrified her. Chaik listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "What are you afraid of?" he finally asked. "Failing," Amina said immediately. Then, more honestly, succeeding. "Why?" "Because if I succeed, everything changes. Our life. Our routine. The way we've been doing things for 20 years. It's already changed," Chaik said. "Zara's gone. The house is empty. You're miserable in that childcare job, even if you won't admit it." Amina started to protest, then stopped. He was right. "This job scares me," she said quietly. "Being away from you scares me. Going back to that kind of work after so long." "You were brilliant at that work," Chaik interrupted. "You built frameworks that people are still using 23 years later. You think I don't remember who you were before we had Zara? You think I don't see how much it's cost you to put that person away?" His voice wasn't angry. It was sad. "I chose to put that person away," Amina said. "I know. And I love you for it. But you don't have to keep choosing it." Amina felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. "What if I take the job and I can't do it anymore?" she whispered. "What if I'm not that person anymore?" Chaik reached across the table and took her hand. "Then you'll come home," he said simply, "and we'll figure out what's next. But Amina, you have to try." The next morning, Amina called David Chen. He answered on the second ring. "Ms. Okoye, I wasn't expecting to hear from you until Monday." "I have questions," Amina said. "Good. I'd be worried if you didn't." They talked for an hour. Amina asked about the travel schedule, the team structure, the expectations for the first 6 months. She asked about the projects that had failed, the consultants who'd burned out, the communities that had rejected VisaLink's approaches. David answered every question honestly. He didn't sugarcoat. He didn't oversell. By the end of the call, Amina's hands had stopped shaking. "Can I ask you something?" David said. "Of course." "Why did you call me this morning instead of waiting?" Amina looked out her kitchen window at the empty backyard, at the life she'd built that suddenly felt too small. "Because I already know my answer," she said. "I just needed to make sure you were telling me the truth about what I'd be walking into." David laughed. "And you were. So I'll take the position." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "You're sure?" David asked. "No," Amina said honestly. "But I'm doing it anyway." "Good," David said. She could hear the smile in his voice. "I'll have HR send over the formal offer by end of day. Welcome to VisaLink, Ms. Okoye." Amina started 2 weeks later. Her first day felt like stepping into a river and discovering she still knew how to swim. The office was overwhelming, too many new faces, too many systems to learn, too much terminology she didn't recognize. But the work itself felt familiar. The problems were the same problems she'd solved in Lagos, just dressed in different languages. Marcus introduced her to the Ghana project team in a video conference. 8 faces appeared on the screen: engineers, community liaisons, project managers scattered across 3 continents. "This is Amina Okoye," Marcus said. "She's our new senior infrastructure consultant. Some of you may recognize her work. She co-authored the NAI protocols we've been using." One of the engineers, a woman in her 30s calling in from Accra, leaned forward. "Wait, you wrote those frameworks?" "Co-wrote them," Amina said. "A long time ago." "Those protocols saved our community engagement process," the woman said. "We were about to lose stakeholder buy-in completely. Your mapping system helped us identify the voices we'd been missing." Amina felt something warm spread through her chest. I'm glad they helped, she said. After the meeting, Marcus caught her in the hallway. You okay? He asked. I think so, Amina said. Jennifer wanted me to tell you something. What? She's been using your work to train our new project managers. She asked if you'd be willing to do a workshop when you're back from Ghana. Amina blinked. Jennifer asked for that. She did. Turns out she's really good at admitting when she's wrong. 3 months later, Amina sat in a small office in Accra, reviewing stakeholder feedback forms with a community leader named Kwame. The work was slow, difficult, exactly as hard as David had warned her it would be. But it was hers. Her phone buzzed. A text from Zara. How's Ghana? Amina smiled and typed back. Hot. Exhausting. Good. 3 dots appeared. Then, I'm proud of you, Mom. Amina stared at the message for a long time. Then she put her phone away and went back to work. 6 months after she started, Amina came home for a 2-week break between projects. Chaik picked her up from the airport. He looked older, more tired. She'd been gone for 5 weeks this time, the longest stretch yet. They drove home in comfortable silence. The house felt different when she walked in. Smaller, quieter, but still home. I missed you, Chaik said, setting her suitcase in the hallway. I missed you too. That night, they sat on the back porch with coffee, watching the sunset. David wants me to present at a conference in Nairobi next month, Amina said, on community-centered infrastructure development. You should do it. It means another 3 weeks away. Chaik was quiet for a moment. Is the work good? Amina thought about the community she'd met in Ghana, the stakeholders she'd learned to trust, the frameworks she was building that might outlast her again. Yes, she said. It's good. Then do it, Chaik said. I'll be here when you get back. Amina leaned her head on his shoulder. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For not asking me to stay small. 1 year after the interview, Amina received an email from a graduate student in Kenya. The subject line read, Question about the NAI protocols. Amina opened it. Dear Ms. Okoye, I'm writing my thesis on telecommunications infrastructure in sub-Saharan Africa, and I've been studying the Northern Access Initiative frameworks. I wanted to reach out because I couldn't find much information about the original authors. Would you be willing to answer a few questions about how those protocols were developed? Your work has been incredibly influential in my research. Amina sat back in her chair. She thought about the woman she'd been at 25, sitting in a cramped office in Lagos, writing frameworks by hand because the power was out again. She thought about the woman she'd become at 47, sitting in a glass conference room, terrified that her work didn't matter anymore. She typed back, I'd be happy to answer your questions. 2 years after the interview, VisaLink promoted Amina to Director of Community Engagement. Jennifer was the first person to congratulate her. You deserve this, Jennifer said. And she meant it. On a quiet Saturday morning, 3 years after the interview that changed everything, Amina sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea. Zara was visiting for the weekend, home from graduate school. She sat across from her mother, working on her laptop. Chaik was in the garden, tending to the tomatoes he'd started growing in Amina's absences. Amina's phone buzzed with a work email. She ignored it. Instead, she pulled out an old folder from the back of a drawer, the one containing her original resume, the one with all the gaps and careful omissions. She looked at it now and saw something different. Not a failure. Not an apology. A map of a life lived fully, even when it didn't look like what she'd planned. What are you reading? Zara asked, glancing up. Nothing important, Amina said. She folded the resume and put it back in the drawer. Outside, Chaik called out that the tomatoes were ready. Amina stood, kissed her daughter on the top of her head, and walked out into the garden. The sun was warm. The work waiting for her in Nairobi could wait another day. Right now, she was home. And she was enough. If this story moved you, hit like, share it with someone, and subscribe for more. Turn on notifications so you'll be the first to know when I drop another unforgettable story like this. If underdog stories like this one resonate with you, take a moment to check our channel. You'll find a full catalog of powerful underdog stories. Stories of the overlooked, the silenced, and the underestimated who rise and triumph. Thank you for watching.